Hello, you're listening to Sending the Experts with Georgina Durrant. This podcast is all about teaching and supporting children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities, SEND. My name is Georgina Durrant. I'm the host of this podcast brought to you by Twinkle SEND. As a former teacher in Senko myself, I wanted to create a platform to share some of the amazing things that my guests are doing to support learners with SEND. So whether you're listening on your commute, tuning in whilst walking your dog, or curled up on the sofa with a nice cup of coffee, thank you so much for joining us. In this episode, I am delighted to be joined by Georgia Gould MP. Georgia Gould was appointed Minister of State, Minister for School Standards at the Department for Education in September 2025. She's here to talk about the SEND reforms that were released as part of the school's white paper earlier this week. Thank you so much for joining us, Georgia, on what must be a really, really busy week for you.
Yeah, it has been a very busy week, but I love the podcast and just really delighted to be here talking to you.
Oh, thank you so much. We'll get started because there's lots of questions, lots to ask you, and I know your time is limited. We'll start with ISPs, EHCPs, and the legal framework because a lot of people have been asking about that. Yeah. So the white paper sets out that all children with SEND will get an individual support plan, an ISP. Could you explain what they are and if there's a legal backing to them? Because I think I've seen a lot of people saying, what happens if the plan's not followed? What happens then?
Sure. So yes, an individual support plan will be a plan for children who are at mainstream school. And so there will be a legal duty for schools to develop inclusion plans, to develop 2 new layers of support, targeted and targeted plus, and to develop individual support plans for children within those layers of support. So there'll be a legal duty to produce these plans and to work with families on these plans. And they will be a kind of a document that the school will develop with the parent and the young person, and it would look different, I suppose, depending on the kind of layer of support. But if you're at that targeted layer, it might set out the reasonable adjustments that you need. So that a child needed a movement break, or to start lunch 10 minutes early, or a small group intervention. Or at that targeted plus level, it might say, that they needed some time in an inclusion base, a curriculum adaptation, access to some of the wider professionals, speech and language, educational psychologists, and so on, that sometimes can be really hard to get access to if you haven't gone through a whole process of getting an EHCP. So to make that support much easier. And the support that we're setting out in those individual support plans will be backed by a new resource. So resource that's going directly into schools, ring-fenced money called the Inclusion Mainstream Fund, which is for schools to spend on pupils with special educational needs and disabilities, and then 1.8 billion into this experts at hand service that will be wraparound support for schools. So these plans are, what we really want is for all children to be seen, and that's what many young people have said to me, that they just really want their needs to be understood, but also their strengths access learning, and that's what we want these plans to do. They will be national digital plans. So it will be, if you move school to a different part of a country, it'll be easy to transfer those plans. But we also think they'll really support transitions from primary to secondary and secondary to college. And often colleges will say that they'll get students and they haven't, they don't know what their needs are, the interventions that really work. So they will be.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. What happens if they aren't followed, though? What can parents do? Because I know you said it's the legal backing. Do we know how that works yet? Like, say you're a parent, you're thinking, oh, my child hasn't been given the movement break that it says on their ISP, and they haven't been given 10-minute pass to get to lunch, as you gave an example. What do they then do?
So we want, firstly, these to be really collaborative. So the first thing we'd want them to do is to talk to the school about that and try and, resolve that at the school level. But if that was really not happening and they needed a kind of to go outside of a school, they would be able to make a complaint. And we're saying if a complaint is related to support around SEND, we're bringing a new independent role into the complaints process, who would kind of look at that complaint as part of a complaints panel, and then the complaints process is meant to be binding on schools, so they would be if that would be a new way of overseeing the process. But I think one of the other things I was really keen to say to parents is that for too long it's been on individual parents to have to drive accountability themselves, and we want ourselves as DFE and local authorities and the whole system to be driving that accountability. So Ofsted will be overseeing the inclusion in schools, including the individual support plans.
Oh, brilliant. Because that's one thing we were thinking with, how does Ofsted fit in with it, and how would that sort of accountability in Ofsted fit in? That's great that they'll be looking at the ISPs then and how
they'll be looking at inclusion, which will include the school will need to develop an inclusion plan that will need to have reference to these new national inclusion standards and ISPs, and Ofsted will be looking at all of that as part of their work around inclusion, and will also be ensuring that that there is better support between schools to kind of quality assure these plans, and to make sure that there is, everywhere you get that high quality support. So it's much more a kind of system accountability rather than everything having to be on families. But we think it is really important that families do have somewhere to go if they're concerned about provision.
Yeah, completely. And I think another thing people are worried about, especially teachers, we've been hearing a little bit worried about how they're going to implement and maintain these ISPs and how, because it sounds like more workload. We know, I've been a Senko, it's an incredibly difficult job. Senkos and teachers are very stretched. How will that work? Are we going to be, practically supporting them in any way with sort of capacity? I just wondered what you're going to be doing there.
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons we've made these national digital documents is to just make it much easier, that they are the same everywhere and that there is that consistency. But I think, having spoken to a lot of Senkos, one of their big frustrations is they can see that the child needs support, and they say to me they have to go into battle themselves to get support from the local authority, from outside, to put something in place for children. And within the new system, we are giving that funding and resource to be able to draw down that support much more easily, so they can put, I think often the battle is not writing it down, it's actually having the support in place to be able to put that provision around a child. So we think that it will, that support will make it much easier to deliver and set out these individual support plans. And we've learned from the best schools that are doing this. So many schools have something like this in place.
Yeah, we've seen that as well. People say we've already got ISPs.
We've already got them, and so they absolutely do. So it's not something we've imagined. But I visited schools. I went to one where I was speaking to families, and they said what a difference it had just to have the needs written down, to have those conversations with the school, and I remember this mum saying to me that for the first time in years, been able to breathe. Her son had been out of education for a year. She'd had to battle, and she got to a school where there was a nurture class. There were a version of these individual plans, and it was just completely life-changing for her. But she'd had to move in order to get a place, and this should just be the provision that everyone gets everywhere. So it's something that we know works in the school system.
Lottery that we're seeing as well. No, I get that.
But we also recognise that the Senko role does need more support to kind of do that strategic leadership. And, part of the resource we're putting into schools can support with some of the administration and some of the wider support for Senkos.
Good, that's great. So on to EHCPs, which I know they've been in the news a lot. Everybody's been concerned about them, understandably. Many families and Senkos are asking for a bit of clarity around it. So at the moment, can you just reassure them the law hasn't changed yet, has it? So if you've got a child in either your own child or if you're a Senko and you've got a child in your school, you can still request at the moment an education healthcare needs assessment, can't you?
You absolutely can, and we're very clear that nothing is going to change in that. Well, actually, I can be really clear that under the new system, they will still be able to request a needs assessment. So even when things change, if they do not think their child's needs are being met by targeted or targeted plus support, they can request a needs assessment. And that is not sequential. They don't have to go through layers of support. They can just request that needs assessment if they think that they need that.
So you don't have to go from one stage to the other.
No,
I think there was talk, wasn't there, possibly in a leak or in sort of the press, sort of misunderstanding perhaps. It was almost like you were going to have to fail a child a few times before they were going to be able to apply for
you'd have to go through all these hoops, and you'd have to go through targeted plus and so on. If a school thinks you need targeted plus, they can put that in place straight away. If a parent thinks that the child needs that specialist provision, they can go forward for a needs assessment. Brilliant. So and that will continue into the new system, and if they are unhappy with the needs assessment, that will still be backed by the tribunal. But I think that more broadly, nothing is, we are really clear that the system will remain as it is. People will still get EHCPs. They will still retain their EHCPs, through into that transition period till 2030, and then people will transition into the new system, but EHCPs will still exist and the needs assessment will still exist.
That's really good to hear, because I think a lot of people worried that local authorities might say, you can't, there's been a SEND reform, you can't now apply for an education healthcare needs assessment, and people would be like, oh, so really clear that we've got that so that people can rely on that information. That's really helpful. And I think as well, the other bit I wanted to clarify was, if you've got a child in year 3 or above with an EHCP, they can keep, if a parent, you want to keep that EHCP, they can keep it right until the end of secondary school. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Brilliant. Good.
And if there is a child at a special school before 2029, they will, if they want to remain at a special school, they can remain at a special school throughout their education. So in secondary school as well as primary school. So I just also wanted to be really clear about that. Obviously, if they want to be at a mainstream school, they can be, but if they want to stay in a special school, they will. And that's another really important safeguard around the transition.
Yeah, so no child that's in a special school right now is going to get moved out of one. Not going to lose their place. Brilliant. I think that's really important to know as well. I've had loads of questions, as you can imagine, on social media asking like specifics on this. And I think there's a few that, parents really need some reassurance on. If we can move on to training, workforce and capacity, I think it's really encouraging to see the focus on SEND training. That was something we put forward in the Education Committee inquiry. We said mandatory SEND training, definitely the way forward. Are you able to share how that's going to work in practice? Like, how are teachers going to get this sent? I know there's been, 200 million towards the training. How's it going to happen?
So this is still in development, and we're still really open to ideas. But at the moment, the plans are that we're going to develop new national courses that schools will be able to request that leaders or teachers or other staff go on, and then we'll develop resources that can be used within schools' own day-to-day kind of training and inset days. So it will be a mix of those two things. And then on top of that, as we build up the new experts at hand service, we really expect that to be a source of support for schools. So it'll be a mix of the things we've talked about: occupational therapists, speech and language therapists, but also specialist teachers. We will be asking special schools and alternative provision to do outreach. So we expect some of those teams to be providing training and support, I suppose, for teachers in what are the strategies that support certain students, but also giving opportunities, they call it in-reach, for them to come and observe practice within those specialist schools. So the 200 million will pay for new courses and new resources, but then the experts at hand will also give that more specific support when you need a more bespoke strategy to help a child.
I suppose that helps it be more ongoing, doesn't it? Because we know training isn't as effective if you just go into a school and you say this is what you should do, but you need to have that continuation, don't you? That access to support. I think that's great. So the experts at hand model, that seems quite ambitious, quite widely welcomed, where you can draw on these banks of specialists and send specialist teachers and speech and language therapists. Where are they coming from though, Georgia? Because that's what a lot of people have been asking. Like, how are you going to magic them up? Are they in university now? Like, where are they going to come from? What's the plan?
So a mix. We've been working with health really closely on this around workforce planning, and the resources already gone into supporting training and building up this workforce, and so this is very much built into their plans. But we're also putting 40 million into training, particularly focused on educational psychologists and speech and language therapists, and that will be bringing forward more people. And we're really clear that this is something that will build up over the next year. The funding will come. It will start this kind of year, like this calendar year and next financial year. So the funding will start almost straight away, but it will build up. And by the time that we transition into the new system, we expect that suite of support to be in place. But we know that there are areas where there are already real cold spots in terms of those allied health professionals. And as we are working with health, we'll be really focused in on those areas and then the different models we're using to bring people in. So new speech and language therapist apprenticeships, for example. But we'll also be asking those who've left the profession to come back. And I've spoken to many education psychologists who say that, they kind of got into the work to help children, but actually they've ended up just doing form filling, bureaucracy and assessments. But this is going to be ring fenced money and support for actual interventions in classrooms alongside teachers, and we think that's going to be really compelling for some people who want to come back and be part of this work.
Yeah, I think we had an education psychologist on the podcast a little while back, and they said exactly that they went into the job to support children, ended up just being there. They didn't build the relationships up with the children, they were just there for the assessment process and just do it for the EHCPs, and it wasn't the job that they sort of first went into.
Yeah, and I've seen when that is different, when I've been to, where I've seen speech and language therapists and educational psychologists that are getting to go in regularly. They get to know the children, their progress. They can advise the teachers on strategies. They can do group work and one-to-one work. But it's, their kind of sense of knowledge of those children is so much deeper.
Yeah.
And I think when you get into some of the harder questions about which children do need specialist provision or specialist provision packages, actually having that wraparound support at Targeted Plus without needing diagnosis or assessment means that these experts will know the children and be able to advise actually this child needs something a bit more. So the hope is as time goes on, actually that assessment process will be much more collaborative, because there'll be real clarity about how you can support children who can thrive in mainstream and the ones that actually do need specialist provision with people who are meeting and know these children. Because I know that so much assessment happens from someone who's never met a child.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we've heard the intentions around inclusion bases. I think we heard about that before the white paper, didn't we, around inclusion bases? But how are we going to make sure they're truly inclusive? Because that's been another thing I've been asked about, like, especially in their very nature, an inclusion base is exclusive because you're taking the children out of a classroom. Is there going to be some clear guidance? Somebody's making it at the moment, isn't there? There's going to be some clear guidance, and will families be able to have a say in if their child attends one? If they don't want their child to be taken out of lessons, can they say no to an inclusion base, or is it not out in their hands?
Yeah, so in terms of inclusion bases, absolutely, we're developing some guidance. There are real differences in the kind of provision that is available at the moment, and we really think it needs to be high quality. And the real advantage of inclusion bases linked to schools is, you get to be educated in your community, close to friends and families, and that wider integration. So it's really important that there is support to do that. To get into the detail, that we expect there to be two kinds of inclusion bases. One is a specialist base that will be kind of commissioned by the local authority, and that will be a kind of specialist place. And one would be a support base, which would be something that would be at the school level and supported by the school or a cluster of schools. And at that support base level, that would be where there would be support for kind of interventions to kind of work with some of these professionals that we've talked about, maybe some lessons or space to re-regulate. At the kind of specialist base, we expect children to have more of their lessons in those spaces, but actually the advantage of being linked to a mainstream school is if they can be in mainstream lessons, they will be supported to do so. And I've seen that work really, really well. I visited an autism base recently where the children were saying that actually they were spending about half of their lessons within the mainstream school, but because of the specialist teaching they had within that inclusion base, they were skilling up the teachers across the school. They knew the children, they were kind of cross-fertilizing that knowledge, and they felt that was enabling them to be in a mainstream school. But for some students, actually access to a quieter space with less sensory overload is the thing that enables them to be in a mainstream space, and that is an adjustment that supports inclusion, even if they're needing to spend some time in that quieter place to be able to link in to the mainstream school for some activities and lessons, and where it works really, really well, but it needs to be like, there needs to be very clear guidance and support. So we'll be setting that out. We've been co-producing it with a number of partners, education experts, parent groups, and others. And again, that's something that Ofsted will be looking at as they inspect schools.
Brilliant. So one of my questions was around national inclusion standards. I'd love to hear more about that, what they will look like in practice and how they will support consistency across the country, because I presume that's the reasoning behind it.
Yeah, so that at the moment, I hear a lot that, actually schools want to do the right thing, but there's a lot out there, a lot of different tools, a lot of different ways of thinking, and actually they want access to the best evidence. What should ordinarily available provision look like? What are the best tools that help identify needs early, and the ways to do that? And what are the kind of the real expectations and minimum standards we should expect, something that I think parents really want access to. So the national inclusion standards will set out the best evidence, the expectations of schools, what should be expected, and the kind of tools that they can draw on to be able to support students. And that will be developed by experts, but in consultation with young people and families.
Brilliant. So that presumably will help as well, because I know there's a lot of talk for sort of neurodivergent children who might need some extra support in lessons, and just thinking, well, that those sorts of things will support them as well, won't it? So things like looking at the sensory environment and
yeah, definitely. And we've learned a lot from the Partnership and Neurodiversity program that we've been running, which has been bringing parents and health partners together with schools. And I've visited schools where they've managed kind of whole school adaptations that made a huge difference. So like sensory circuits that are available for all children, but like really support neurodiverse children, visual timetables, a kind of structuring of lessons and the way that they're taught, which again helps all children, but particularly helps neurodivergent children. So there, we've seen really good examples of how that has worked well. So we want to highlight that best practice, but also to set out kind of what are the kind of real expectations that we expect from every school.
Yeah, brilliant. So another thing is around trust. Now we know that trust between sort of families and schools, Senkos and local authorities, between everybody, has been been completely damaged, if I'm being honest, with the previous system. And we know the SEND system can be really incredibly difficult to navigate at the moment for parents. What do you see as the key steps to like building this trust up? Because even if you're bringing out some fantastic things, I think there's still going to be that element of not trusting and being worried because it's their children, and understandably they want the best for their children.
Of course. And I think, I've talked to parents around the country, and just the stories just sit with me all the time. The extent of failure that has happened for families, the way that so many families haven't been listened to. They've watched their children's needs get worse and worse, get into this years lost, and they've just found that no one is able to listen. And there's just no doubt that children have been badly failed, and there are lots of amazing people in the system who want to support, but talk to teachers and they're like, we just don't have the training and resource to be able to put things in place. The system just hasn't been set up for everyone to work together and succeed. So I really recognize how much work needs to be done to rebuild that trust, and it's why we took so much time with families, and why we're taking such a long-term staged approach. So why we're building up the new system until 2030, putting in all the investment first. And I think things will change when people see it in their communities, when they kind of when the inclusion bases go in, when the practice changes, when they're seeing that day-to-day change. And I talked about parents always feeling like they're the ones that have to hold the system to account. And when it comes to local authority decision making as well, actually that's on us as the Department for Education to make sure that we are holding local authorities to account on their performance for families, and that the parents are really seeing that. Of course, we need to put the right support in, and we're helping local authorities with their deficits, but we also need to provide that challenge. And in terms of the system readiness and the reassurance to parents, I think that we're not asking parents to just trust me and ourselves as politicians, but we've asked the Children's Commissioner to provide that independent role and assess and monitor system readiness and change over the next few years. So that will provide some independent scrutiny at a national level, but then at a local level, we're really wanting to strengthen parent voice in that oversight.
Brilliant. I suppose, it's like the trust when they see it happen, and if it goes as you're saying and is brilliant, then that trust will naturally hopefully be rebuilt.
And I hope it's not gonna turn around overnight, but every year it should get better. This resource that we're putting in, the accountability that we're putting in, every year we should start to see that improvement. And my ask for families is just to keep working with us, through the consultation, through the implementation. This is a long-term commitment to change things.
Yeah. And finally, my last question, because we've had a lot of people who are home educating, either they've chosen to home educate their children or they felt like they've been forced into home education because the existing system hasn't met their child's needs. I think they're wondering how they fit into it a little bit and how the reforms will help rebuild pathways perhaps back into education if they want to, or how it's supporting, children who are happily home educated and that's the way they want to do it. What are we doing for them?
Yeah, so as I said, I recognise that lots of young people have had a really negative experience of the current system, and actually that's why they're being home educated. There are also other young people who have desperate to be in school and the places are not available. So the 3.7 billion we're putting into specialist places is really important, I think, for making sure that in communities where children want to come back into education, that is the case. One of the things we will be asking local authorities to focus on is reintegration packages to support the children that feel that they can come back into an education setting, because we think there are real benefits to being in school and having that support, and as we go forward, we really hope that these changes will mean more children are able to be in school, and that trend that we've seen of children have falling out of education will turn around, because our mainstream schools are much more inclusive and able to meet the needs in their community, but then also that every area has the specialist provision that is needed to support children.
Brilliant. And thank you ever so much, Georgia. That's great. And people can join in the consultation, can't they? That's open for 12 weeks.
It's open for 12 weeks. We really want to hear from people, because this is a generational opportunity to improve the SEND system and to support children better, and we need to. It has to be a partnership. So I really encourage people to join in with a consultation.
Brilliant. I'll put the link in the bottom of the podcast.
Thanks so much.